tradition. And if you don't catch the ways that he is both diminishing certain things and elevating other things, you may miss what he's doing. Jesus sometimes can be a little bit of, a jester in the king's court? He can be a little bit of a jester, where he's the only one who can sort of mock something that has been maybe elevated too high, but he also elevates something that has been neglected or left out or thought too low of. Jesus is always playing with these cultural expectations of his society. And here he takes on actually the religious expectation of the law and the prophets. But he does some interesting things there. So he takes something they would have known really well, and he sort of minimizes it or reduces it a bit by boiling it down and says, here's what really matters, right? These are the greatest commandments. But then he does something else tricky, and this is what a first century audience would have caught that sometimes we miss. He says, unless your righteousness surpasses the religious professionals who do this for a living, the standard bearers, the gatekeepers, you'll never get in. And we think, oh, all right, I'll try. But the original audience would have known, AKA, that's impossible. That's what those guys have done from the age of 12. Every day, all day, this is what they do. Unless your righteousness, Dory, surpasses that of the pious religious leaders, you have no shot to enter the kingdom. You can't get past the gatekeepers. So the first century audience would have said, oh man, this is not going well. Except that Jesus was always pointing out the places where the system was failing, or where the inconsistencies were so glaring and actually were hurting people. So Jesus does a really interesting thing with tradition. He says, I didn't come to abolish it, I came to fulfill it. And you think, all right, I'm sure that means something. Not quite sure what you're up to, but I'm sure it means something. So I've noticed that an interesting thing happens, is we sort of like when Jesus is ornery, or when he's a stinker, or where he points out hypocrisy and inaccuracy. We sort of like when Jesus is in that role, because he points out the places where the past is failing, or where the ideal is coming up short. Right? And those are some of our favorite parts of Jesus in the Gospels to quote. But then a weird thing happens. We take that thing that Jesus was poking holes in, and we then take that thing and we make it concrete, or we try to establish it as the new rule. And so what we've ended up doing is, in one sense, replicating or reinforcing the very thing that Jesus was undermining and interrogating and subverting. So we take Jesus and we say, oh, we like when Jesus does this, when he makes fun of the religious system or the hypocrisy or the cruelty of the system. But then we take the new system and we try and make that as concrete as the thing that Jesus was poking holes in. So I think today we have to ask ourselves a question. Can the past save us? That's our theme for today. That's the question we're going to wrestle with. First, I'm going to present an idea. Then I have a friend coming to the table to wrestle with it, and then we're going to be later in little conversation groups to wrestle with it again. So this is what we're going to talk today. Can the past save us? So I want to put something up on the screen. I have a couple slides to sort of get us started and get our juices flowing. We live in a time where the past is hot. Here's just 3 books I've read in the last year. One is called Retromania, Pop Culture's Addiction to Its Own Past. And you'll notice that almost everything that comes out, I tried to go to a movie about a year ago, and every preview for upcoming movies was either a reboot or some type of a relaunch of a previous franchise. Right? It's almost like Hollywood is completely out of ideas. And actually now with technology, we've got it so that even in our music, most of our music is sampling previous music at some level, right? Pop culture is fascinated with its own recent past. So that's an interesting thing to think about. This affects our families too. Here's a book called The Way We Never Were. American Families in the Nostalgia Trap. You know, people always reference Leave It to Beaver. Were any of you alive during the Leave It to Beaver? Was that sort of a documentary about how life really was? Not even close. And yet it gets held up as this nostalgic idea. So that was a fascinating book. And then the most recent book I've read is called Consumed Nostalgia, Memory in the Age of Fast Capitalism. And it's about how so many of us are sort of fascinated with things that make us feel like we were kids or when we were teenagers. And so we try and go back and finish a collection, whether it's of baseball cards or trinkets or kitsch or whatever it is, right? But in some way or we go to antique stores to try and find our grandma's china or whatever it is. We are searching in a consumer way for something that reminds us of this thing that felt better. It's actually a part of so many areas of our life. I'll put this up. You may be aware that politically there's a movement right now to try and reclaim the past. On Hat Sunday, I had to show you this hat. My friend made this for me. It's a fake meme machine, but I'm always talking about romanticizing an imagined past. You know, make the past great again is not a bad slogan. You could get elected on something like that. It permeates every aspect of our culture, but I think that today, especially as we're reading this book, We Make the Road by Walking, I think the conversation we have to have is, can the past save us? And I'm going to argue it can't. But for a couple odd reasons. So let me put up the next thing so you can see. Our institutions are failing us. At almost every level, the institutions that just say 50 or 70 years ago sort of held up our society are crumbling. I don't know if you watch the news, but we have what's called congressional gridlock, governmental dysfunction, where you can't get anything done in Washington, right? So our democracy is sort of being stretched and pulled at the seams, and people are worried that it's going to pull apart in our generation. Capitalism is running into its own problems, where the too big to fail banks and the car bailouts, right, where our democracy, whether it's the tech bubbles that burst and the stock market crashes, that capitalism itself is actually being done better by China, which is not democratic. And it's sort of freaking everybody out. They're calling it like capitalism 3.0 or something because they can't figure out what's happening. But our economic system is falling apart. With nationalism, that we have these endless wars we can't get out of because when do you know if you've defeated terror? How do you know if a war on terror is over? So we have these two wars we can't get out of, but we can't figure out how to secure our own borders. So the very fabric of our society and the political partisanship that we find ourselves in, we live in a time of great dysfunction where our institutions are crumbling. Religion is on its way down as far as across the board in church attendance, but even within existing institutions, for instance, like the Methodist, I just pulled one out. We are buckling under trying to answer the questions that our culture is asking us. We're trying to answer the 21st century questions with 18th century answers. And it is buckling. Our institutions are crippling. And people are getting nervous. There's a sense that things are out of control. And so I think we have to ask the question, will the past save us? My answer is no. The questions that our circumstance is asking us cannot be satisfied with answers from a previous century. Something has changed. Something has shifted in our culture, and we have to have different kinds of conversations and come up with different kinds of answers because the questions themselves have changed. But unfortunately, and I think that Christianity particularly, but all religion, is fascinated with the past. Here's one of my biggest clues. I want to put up a list of RE words. Some of you know I'm allergic to RE words. In my year of being a professor 2 years ago, I got to travel and go to different churches, and I would always pick up their news sheet or their worship guide, and I picked up their literature. I'd go to their website, and I noticed an obsession with words that start with RE. Revisit, reclaim, restore, return, renew, reform, renovate, reframe, redefine, remember, recall, reimagine, represent, reinforce, revive, reexamine, redeem, react, respond, and Christians love retreats. But here's my deep suspicion, is the reason we're obsessed with RE words is that we think God worked in the past. And if we could only get back there, then everything would be better. We could find what is now we feel like we're missing. So I want to propose something different to you. I want to propose to you that God, who is timeless, not bound by time at all, is actually calling to us in our present moment from the future and speaking into each moment possibilities for a preferable way forward. And that as we partner with God in our present moment, we open up possibilities that were not even imaginable or perceivable before, because God, who is the future, the power of the future, calls into each moment and opens up a way where there seems to be no way. I'm going to propose that the past cannot save us because the questions themselves have changed, and that answers from a previous century simply won't satisfy. We've got to have a different kind of conversation, and we've got to be open to the possibility that the answers might be different than they were in the 1800s. The past won't save us. That's what I'd like to talk about today. So I'm going to ask, just for a mental break, if the ushers will come to collect the offering, and then I'm going to have Beth come to the table, and we're going to talk about this a little bit.